the question there ultimately is does Christianity remain the same if it takes on the cultural trappings or thinking there in a way of another country?
Breaking news has just shaken the film world. Martin Scorsese, the legendary director who redefined cinema, is now facing a heartbreaking turn in his life. From the masterpieces that defined generations to the personal battles he's kept hidden, Scorsese's story has always been larger than life. But this latest revelation is one that no one saw coming. Stay with us, because in the next few minutes, we'll uncover the shocking truth about what Martin Scorsese is going through right now and why it's leaving Hollywood and his millions of fans absolutely devastated. Just minutes ago, heartbreaking news emerged that has left Hollywood shaken and fans around the world stunned. Martin Scorsese, the man who transformed modern cinema and redefined what storytelling could be, is facing a devastating moment in his life. For decades, Scorsese seemed larger than life, untouchable, unstoppable, a force of creativity who pushed the boundaries of filmmaking in ways no one else dared. But today's news is a sobering reminder that even legends cannot escape time, pain, and the struggles of human frailty. To understand the weight of this moment, one must look at what Scorsese means to film. He wasn't simply a director. He was an artist who reshaped how audiences experience stories. With films like Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, and Goodfellas, Scorsese pulled back the curtain on society's darkest corners, portraying characters riddled with conflict, guilt, and obsession. His films were violent, yes, but they were also deeply human, unflinching mirrors held up to the world. This vision gave him an unmatched reputation as a master storyteller, someone who refused to soften his art for commercial appeal. Yet behind the brilliance was always a man paying a personal price. At 81 years old, Scorsese has spoken candidly about the toll of time. In recent interviews, he admitted his fears of mortality and confessed how he wonders whether he will have enough time to tell all the stories that still burn inside him. Fans noticed subtle changes, too. His public appearances in recent months revealed a slower walk, a more fragile figure, and an exhaustion in his eyes that suggested more than just age. Many dismissed these as the natural effects of a long and demanding career, but today's heartbreaking news confirms that the struggles go far deeper. The cost of Scorsese's relentless pursuit of perfection cannot be understated. His collaborations with actors like Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, and Leonardo DiCaprio produced some of the greatest performances in cinematic history, but they also revealed his uncompromising nature. He was notorious for shooting endless takes, obsessing over details and battling studios who wanted him to compromise his vision. While this perfectionism gave us masterpieces, it also consumed him. Sleep was lost, relationships fractured, and his own health was pushed to the edge. This devotion to art created films that will last forever, but it also carved scars that are only now becoming visible to the public eye. Scorsese's journey from a sickly child in New York's Little Italy to one of the most celebrated directors of all time makes today's news even harder to process. Asthma kept him off the streets as a boy, but it pushed him into the darkness of movie theaters, where he found his true calling. From those early days, he absorbed the rhythms of Hitchcock, Ford, and Powell before carving out his own unmistakable style. His early films like Mean Streets showcased the Catholic guilt, neighborhood violence, and moral dilemmas that would become his trademarks. By the time Taxi Driver and Raging Bull arrived, Scorsese was no longer just a filmmaker. He was a revolutionary voice who forced audiences to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their world. But every victory came with a battle. The Last Temptation of Christ sparked protests and condemnation from religious groups. Critics called his movies too violent, too dark, too disturbing. Studio executives hesitated to fund his projects, fearful of controversy or financial loss. Yet Scorsese never yielded. He fought for his vision, time and again, pouring his very soul into each frame of film. That defiance gave us cinema at its most daring, but it also meant that Scorsese lived much of his career at war, with the industry, with audiences, and often with himself, and that is why today's news cuts so deeply. This isn't just about a man growing old. It's about watching one of the greatest voices in film history confront the very limits of life itself. For fans, Scorsese is not simply a director. He is cinema's beating heart. To see him now vulnerable, diminished, and carrying the weight of frailty is to be reminded of the inescapable truth. Even legends must one day bow to time. Still, his story is far from over. For while the heartbreaking news forces us to face Scorsese's humanity, it also compels us to reflect on the incredible legacy he has built. His films, his vision, and his impact will continue to inspire generations of filmmakers and audiences long after he is gone. The question now is not just what the news means for Martin Scorsese's future, but what it means for the future of cinema itself. And that is where we turn next. Because the only way to truly understand the weight of today's revelation is to examine the empire of masterpieces Scorsese created and the sacrifices that fueled them. When we speak of Martin Scorsese's career, we are not merely listing films. We are tracing the evolution of modern cinema itself. Few directors in history have been able to combine raw authenticity with artistic brilliance the way Scorsese has. His work is not only iconic, but also deeply influential, shaping generations of filmmakers who followed. To understand the heartbreak of the present moment, one must first recognize the towering legacy Scorsese has built, a legacy written in celluloid, blood, sweat, and uncompromising vision. His early works in the 1970s announced the arrival of a filmmaker unafraid to show the darker corners of society. Mean Streets captured the raw energy of New York's Little Italy, drawing directly from Scorsese's own upbringing. Then came Taxi Driver, the 1976 masterpiece that not only cemented Robert De Niro as one of the greatest actors of his generation, but also established Scorsese as the chronicler of loneliness, violence, and moral decay in urban America. Travis Bickle, the disturbed cab driver at the center of the story, was more than a character. He was a reflection of the alienation Scorsese himself felt at times in his life. The film shocked audiences, divided critics, and sparked debates about violence in cinema. But it was undeniable. A new voice had arrived, and it would not be silenced. The 1980s brought what many consider Scorsese's crowning achievement: Raging Bull. Shot in stark black and white, it told the story of Jake LaMotta, a boxer consumed by rage and jealousy. De Niro's performance, for which he famously gained and lost enormous amounts of weight, was hailed as one of the greatest in film history. But just as important was Scorsese's direction. He turned a boxing film into an opera of violence and redemption, using slow-motion shots, brutal sound design, and religious imagery to elevate the story beyond sport. It was not simply about boxing, it was about the destructive power of obsession. For Scorsese, it was also personal. At the time, he was battling his own addictions and inner demons, and the film served as a mirror to his struggles. Critics and audiences alike recognized its brilliance, and it remains a cornerstone of his legacy. Throughout the 1990s, Scorsese redefined the gangster genre with Goodfellas and Casino. Where earlier gangster films often glamorized organized crime, Scorsese stripped away the myth to show the gritty, bloody, and chaotic reality of life in the mob. The fast cuts, the voiceover narration, the use of popular music, all became trademarks of his style, copied endlessly by others but never replicated with the same authenticity. Goodfellas in particular is still considered one of the greatest films of all time, studied in film schools and beloved by audiences for its relentless energy and unforgettable performances. But Scorsese's genius was not limited to crime dramas. He explored religious faith in The Last Temptation of Christ and Silence, examined excess and greed in The Wolf of Wall Street, and returned to haunting themes of mortality with The Irishman. That latter film, released in 2019, was especially poignant, Featuring De Niro, Joe Pesci, and Al Pacino, it felt like a farewell, a meditation on aging, regret, and the loneliness of old men haunted by their past. The de-aging technology used in the film grabbed headlines, but it was the emotional weight of the story that left viewers shaken. Many critics called it Scorsese's late career masterpiece, a final statement on the world he had spent decades dissecting. And then in 2023, he stunned audiences again with Killers of the Flower Moon. Starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro, it told the harrowing true story of greed, betrayal, and murder among the Osage Nation in 1920s Oklahoma. The film was both a historical epic and a modern reflection on exploitation and injustice. At over 3 hours long, it was the kind of ambitious project that only Scorsese could have delivered, and it proved that even in his 80s, his vision remained as sharp as ever. What makes Scorsese's legacy even more remarkable is how deeply it has influenced others. Quentin Tarantino, Paul Thomas Anderson, Spike Lee, and countless other directors have cited him as a major inspiration. His mastery of music, pacing, and moral complexity became the blueprint for a new generation of filmmakers. Yet, as many of his protégés have admitted, no one can quite match the raw emotional honesty of a Scorsese film. His stories feel lived in because they are drawn from his own. Battles with guilt, faith, addiction, and survival. Still, this legacy was not built without personal sacrifice. Every masterpiece came with sleepless nights, endless disputes with studios, and years of pushing himself past exhaustion. The heartbreaking reality behind his towering career is that it consumed him. And as he faces the challenges of age and health, many wonder whether the cost was too high. Today's news resonates so strongly because it highlights the tension at the heart of Scorsese's life, the brilliance of his art and the burden it placed on his body and soul. His films will endure forever, but the man behind them is fragile, vulnerable, and human. As Hollywood mourns this difficult moment, it also celebrates the unparalleled contributions he has made to the art of cinema. And yet, as we will see in the next chapter, the road to greatness was never smooth. It was paved with battles, controversies, and the unrelenting pursuit of perfection that nearly destroyed him more than once. Martin Scorsese's career is celebrated for its brilliance, but behind the golden statues and critical acclaim lies a history of relentless battles, fierce controversies, and painful sacrifices. If his films are remembered for their unflinching honesty, then the man himself lived a life just as turbulent. Every masterpiece he created came at a cost, personally, professionally, and emotionally. And the heartbreaking truth of today's news cannot be fully understood without revisiting the conflicts that shaped his journey. One of Scorsese's earliest and most defining battles came with censorship. From the moment Taxi Driver hit theaters in 1976, the director was thrust into the center of a national debate. The film's depiction of violence and its shocking climax were so intense that the ratings board initially demanded changes. Scorsese famously adjusted the color of the blood in the final shootout scene to a darker shade so it would appear less graphic, an artistic compromise he made only to save the film from being banned. Yet this experience would define his career. Scorsese would always push the boundaries of what cinema could show, regardless of who it offended. Perhaps the most infamous controversy came in 1988 with The Last Temptation of Christ. Scorsese had long been fascinated with questions of faith, guilt, and redemption, and this project was his attempt to explore the humanity of Jesus Christ. But religious groups erupted in protest, condemning the film as blasphemous before it was even released. Protests erupted outside theaters, and in some places, screenings were attacked. Scorsese received death threats, and Universal Pictures faced boycotts. For many filmmakers, such opposition might have ended a career. But Scorsese stood firm, insisting that the film was not an attack on faith, but an exploration of it. Though the controversy overshadowed the movie's release, it remains one of his most personal works, proof of his willingness to risk everything for his vision. Beyond censorship and controversy, Scorsese also fought battles with the very system. He helped define Hollywood studios. His films were often seen as too risky or too artistic to guarantee profit. Again and again, he had to scrape together financing, relying on personal connections or independent backers to fund his projects. Gangs of New York, for example, took nearly 2 decades to make, as Scorsese struggled to find a studio willing to invest in his sprawling vision of 19th-century New York. Even The Irishman, one of his most celebrated late works, was rejected by major studios because of its length and cost. It was only Netflix, eager to prove itself in prestige cinema, that finally gave Scorsese the resources to bring the story to life. These struggles were not only professional, but deeply personal. Scorsese's perfectionism made him a demanding director, and while many actors admired his brilliance, others found him difficult to work with. He was known for shooting endless takes, obsessing over the smallest details, and pushing his cast and crew beyond their limits. For Scorsese, good was never enough. It had to be perfect. This intensity sometimes strained relationships, leaving him isolated even as his films earned worldwide praise. Behind the camera, Scorsese wrestled with his own demons. In the late 1970s, as his career seemed destined to skyrocket, he nearly destroyed himself with drug addiction. Cocaine and exhaustion nearly killed him, and he has spoken openly about being hospitalized, hovering near death before Robert De Niro urged him to channel his struggles into filmmaking. That plea gave birth to Raging Bull, which many consider his most powerful film, a movie that reflected his personal battle with self-destruction. It was, in many ways, a turning point. But it also highlighted the razor's edge on which he lived. His art was inseparable from his pain. Even in recent years, controversy has followed him. His comments about superhero films, particularly Marvel, stirred intense backlash when he described them as theme parks rather than true cinema. Fans of the franchise attacked him, while other filmmakers defended his right to critique the industry. The debate exposed a deeper truth. Scorsese had always seen himself as a guardian of cinema's artistic integrity, standing against the commercialization and homogenization of Hollywood. To him, movies were sacred, and any threat to their artistry was worth fighting against, no matter the cost. What emerges from these battles is a portrait of a man who never compromised. He faced protests, censorship, rejection, and near self-destruction, yet he always returned to the camera. His resilience is part of why today's heartbreaking news feels so profound. Scorsese wasn't just another filmmaker. He was a fighter, someone who risked everything to stay true to his vision. And every controversy, every battle, every personal sacrifice added to the weight he now carries at 81. The truth is, greatness rarely comes without a price. For Scorsese, that price was steep. Years of emotional turmoil, broken relationships, and a constant fight to keep his art alive. The news we hear today is not just about his health or his struggles. It is about the toll of a lifetime spent chasing perfection. And while Hollywood mourns this difficult moment, it also acknowledges that the very battles that nearly destroyed him are the same ones that made his films immortal. In the next chapter, we turn to the most important question of all. How will Martin Scorsese be remembered? His films will live on, but what will history say about the man behind the camera, the artist, the fighter, the visionary, and the human being who gave everything to his craft? At 81 years old, Martin Scorsese is not just a filmmaker. He is a monument to cinema itself. His name is etched into the very foundation of Hollywood, alongside the greats who defined what movies could be. But as heartbreaking news spreads about his health and personal struggles, it forces the world to reflect on both his extraordinary legacy and the fragile humanity that lies behind it. For decades, audiences have seen him as the mastermind behind gangster epics, psychological dramas, and stories of broken men seeking redemption. Yet few realize how deeply those stories mirrored his own battles with mortality, faith, and meaning. The legacy Scorsese leaves behind is vast and untouchable. With films like Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, Casino, and The Irishman, he created not just entertainment, but cultural landmarks that defined generations. Every frame of his movies carries a signature: the long tracking shots, the explosive bursts of violence, the moral ambiguity of characters who live in the gray space between good and evil. These weren't just stylistic flourishes. They were reflections of Scorsese's worldview, shaped by his upbringing in Little Italy, where crime, faith, and survival intertwined daily. He gave voice to the struggles of men torn between loyalty and ambition, guilt and desire, faith and sin. But his influence extends beyond his own work. Through his mentorship, he shaped the careers of countless actors and filmmakers. Leonardo DiCaprio, one of Hollywood's biggest stars, has often credited Scorsese as the man who pushed him beyond heartthrob roles into a serious acting career. Robert De Niro, meanwhile, found in Scorsese not just a director, but a lifelong collaborator and friend, their partnership producing some of cinema's greatest performances. Beyond actors, Scorsese became a champion for film preservation, founding organizations to restore classic movies and protect cinema's history for future generations. It is no exaggeration to say that without him, much of film's golden past would have been lost forever. And yet, as we celebrate his triumphs, the heartbreaking truth of today's news cannot be ignored. In recent years, Scorsese has spoken openly about his fears of mortality, about running out of time to tell the stories still inside him. His film, Killers of the Flower Moon, released when he was already in his 80s, was a project he poured everything into, calling it one of his most important works. But behind the pride was also a quiet sadness. Scorsese admitted that every new film could be his last. For a man who has lived his entire life through the camera, the thought of putting it down is almost unbearable. The personal side of Scorsese's life reveals even more layers of heartbreak. His career often came at the expense of family and personal relationships. Married 5 times, he has openly acknowledged that his obsession with film left little room for stability. His daughter Francesca, however, has become a bright light in his later years, often appearing with him on social media and reminding fans of the tender, human side of the legendary director. But even with family close by, there is a loneliness that lingers, a weight carried by a man